What do people look like for their cardiovascular fitness? How much muscle do they have? How strong they are? You stack those three things up, and that's going to outpredict how long you're going to live and how well you're going to live than almost any other medical test you could possibly come up with.
We're talking these days a lot about the role that physical activity, exercise plays in longevity, cognitive function, and so many aspects of life, right? That make life worth living, that keep us healthy, that keep us mobile. So why is it that exercise seems to be this? I mean, if there's any magic pill for longevity, for an increase in health span, it seems to be exercise. Why is that the case?
You have a lot of factors. We could spend the entire conversation on that. Actually, I would say it's really hard to make a cogent argument that any part of your physiology is not improved with exercise. And really any form of exercise. If you want to start differentiating between physical activity, kind of movement, walking, steps, standing, things like that, and structured exercise, we can start pulling apart nuance there. That's important. If you want to further delineate things like resistance exercise or strength training from endurance exercise, we can start getting in the granularities there. So at the initial set though, it's just really, again, hard to pick a system. Pick your immune system, bone health, mental health, brain health, social interaction, eye and vision health. Like, it just really doesn't matter. You can find extensive evidence on that. And this is why when you hear people say things like, there are three major pillars of health: exercise, nutrition, and sleep. That's why. You could make teleological arguments. We could make ancestral arguments. Like, we could go on and on and on in any of the areas. So when you have evidence like that is well-rounded, it is robust, and it is cumbersome, it starts to end the conversation about if, does. It's now becoming like, how do I optimize? How do I develop things that are now practical for me, that are useful, that are going to be sustainable? And we start getting into more of those types of questions rather than just trying to convince people anymore whether or not exercise works.
That makes sense. Do you think it's helpful for the average person to make the distinction between the various types of exercise that exist, resistance training, aerobic exercise, and just generally being active?
I'll say both, yes and no. The quick version is, if this is stuff you're into and you really want to get better, yes. If this stuff makes you want to pull your hair out and you're just not interested, don't let that deter you from anything then. So then fine, eliminate it, right? Just move, just do whatever, right? We could have the same conversation, even probably more particularly about nutrition, right? So like, man, people just get really fired up, get so emotional, get so religious about those things. Don't let that interfere with someone having a basic plan. I'll give you an example there and I'll come right back to exercise. My dad, right? So I'm a country kid, I'm from the country. My dad probably has not had a vegetable, I don't know, since he was 10, over 50 years, right? In my entire life, I've tried to get him to eat better, right? He's just like not going to eat there. After a number of years, I'd give him evidence, I'd give him like all kinds of things, right? It's not changing any pattern.
It's hard to be a prophet in your own land.
It's pretty tough, right? Especially when it's your son,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're just not going to, sure, kid, like, all those things. So eventually, I decided to not let information get in the way of motivation. And what I mean by that is, he came to me one day and was like, oh man, have you heard all these things about carbohydrates being the devil, if you will? Like all this stuff. Of course, I'm pushing back heavily on all these things. Well, one day I just stopped and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to cut out carbs. And I'm like, great, what are carbs? And he was like, fill in the blank of chips, blah, 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 right? I'm like, what about, potatoes and fruit? And he was like, yeah, fine. So I'm like, great. He doesn't know what they actually are. He's just going to eliminate junk food, and that's fantastic. Huge success. We're talking 60 pounds of weight loss very rapidly, reduction of blood pressure medication, reduction of many other markers. His doctor's like, you're fantastic. And all I had to do was shut up. Now, was it optimal? No. Was it the one? No. But I was getting in the way with so much information. I was killing his motivation to make change with information. So in that particular case, it didn't matter he was wrong. I just got out of the way. Now, as time went on, I started saying, hey, do you think we could fold something green into your mouth at some point? No. Great. So what are you doing for lunch? I'm eating, typically, again, we are from the country, so most of the meat we consume, we've harvested ourselves, right? But he's still I'm going to have a protein shake for lunch. Great. Can we put some greens powder in? Now, are greens powder the same? No, I would much rather eat food like all that. Yes. But he's like, fine. If I don't taste it, fine. So I got him to move there. Months go on. Now can I get you to have some fruit in there? Great. So I just wanted small increments, and I knew that this is probably a many, many years, if not decades long battle to get him to what I think is true. We still have all kinds of problems, like fiber is non-existent, just like many, many issues. But guess what? His 50 years of taking medication for his heartburn, getting better.
Wow.
Not gone away, but like getting better, and we're starting to make these things. So to kind of summarize the point there is, if you're in a situation like that where, use the example of exercise, I pulled it to nutrition, but the same thing. If this is getting in the way of somebody just having better habits, it's not always the best thing to ruin that with more specific information and trying to optimize. So the exercise example would be the same thing. If your friend, family, etc., is trying to just start moving and all they're doing is, pick your example, walking, Pilates, whatever. Great. Maybe it's fine to just get them in that habit and culture and feeling better, and then we can start going, hey, you know what? Actually, there's a difference between being active and exercising. There's a difference between strength training and resistance training and cardio or conditioning or however you want to phrase it. But maybe you don't need to have that as your first conversation.
Yeah, there's, I feel like a lot of people probably likely experience analysis paralysis today because if there's just so many cooks in the kitchen, right? From their own healthcare providers to the people in their inner circles and their families and in their communities and their social lives, and then all the constant deluge of information that is social media.
Yeah.
Huge problem.
Yeah, I agree. This is the plight that we're living in, right? So here's our juxtaposition: more access to information, harder decision making.
So what was the big needle mover for your dad? You said just cutting out junk food, essentially?
Initially, just getting going, right? Now, in his case, he did specifically reduce carbohydrates. I don't think that did anything other than reducing calories. He was not, we could have a whole conversation there. You've covered that, at length.
Yeah.
But the point is, he needed to make a change, right? Now, again, you're talking about a classic example of going from probably had steak and eggs for breakfast, then almost surely some sort of fast food for lunch, a lot of candy throughout the day, and then probably a frozen pizza or something at night, right?
Such a great start to the day, though. Steak and eggs. You don't get better than that.
No, great. Still, that has persisted. That's not changing. So we're talking about a change from about the worst diet one could come up with to anything better than that is going to have massive improvements. So I really don't want people to pay attention to the carbohydrate part of the story. That is not the relevant piece. It is went from a horrific diet to now reduction of calories, pure number one, right? All the physiological benefits that came along with him reducing 50 pounds plus on that, and all the other things that went on there. That's what mattered. And then folding back in nutritional pieces is great. He still has a ton of deficiencies in nutrients and other problems, but it's that thing. Just a fundamental change from what would be globally associated and agreed upon as a very poor diet to a significantly less poor diet would be the approach there.
I think when I started out, I was a little over fixated on carbohydrates, and I probably...
Yeah. I'll be totally honest with you. That's one that when we first connected, I'm like, he's one of those anti-carb guys. I'm out.
I'm not, though.
I know you're not.
Yeah, I'm not.
But that was totally my perception of you.
And I've definitely evolved, but yeah, these days I am completely right there with you. I'm eating more carbs than I've ever consumed, and I hereby renounce all former low carb zealotry if it was perceived as such, which I don't think I ever was.
I didn't see anything that you actually were. I think it was just one of those.
I think there's a perception of me,
yeah.
Because in my first book I wrote at length about the value of the ketogenic diet in a specific context, right?
Probably
and how important it is to continue to study it as a therapeutic tool in the context of neurodegeneration,
which is held up. Totally.
Yeah, but yeah, now these days I'm completely right there with you. I think it's ultimately a calorie problem, and and even beyond that, it's a food quality problem, as your dad, the situation with your dad illustrates.
Yeah. Yep. There's a lot more to say about that as well. Nutrition's so interesting. It's kind of one of those insanely complex yet ultra simple, right? On the surface level, this can be very, very simple and get a lot of people a long ways. On the other end of the spectrum, the age and ability to get to precision nutrition is right here. Some of the stuff that we can do that we are doing with blood work, that we can do with full body analysis, that we can do with simulations, we can get real high precision, real high success in people getting those very small percentage increase. That's what I spend most of my time. I don't work with anything what we'll call disease, right? So I don't work with disease treatment, management. I don't do anything with longevity. All the clients I work with are either high performing athletes, historically. More recently, we've got our executive coaching program, but these are now people that are healthy, right? So you want to go from healthy to performing at your absolute best. My career, that context has always been on a field or a thing or whatever. Now it is the same thing. You want to run businesses, be a better parent, whatever, it doesn't matter. So my approach has always been there. Go from good to great. Like, what's the limit there? So there's a lot of fun stuff we can do there that's very interesting. The whole kind of going from terrible like my dad to just like less terrible was never as appealing to me personally, though I'll admit arguably more important to the world, pretty clearly. And so, yeah, we can be very, very simple like my dad. Okay, sure, for you and your brain, don't eat carbs. The way that means to you in your stage, that was a phenomenal one-step approach. Our other approaches now can go the other extreme, like extremely high precision, micronutrient-based protocols, very specific timings and stuff we can do based on unique physiology. And that's going to continue to grow. So we can play the nutrition game at any level of the spectrum. It just depends on what you're interested in doing, what you're asking your body to do, and what you're capable of putting in yourself.
What is your read on, because we live in a time where, at least on social media, the culture is very much dominated in the nutrition sphere by nutrition tribalism, right?
Yeah.
You've got the carnivores, you've got the vegans, constantly warring, debating the value of animal protein versus plant protein. The carnivores will claim that we don't need any fiber, that fiber is this completely non-essential throwaway nutrient.
Sure.
And then others make it out to be the primary nutrient that we need to be focused on, right? So there's like this polarity. What's your general read on that situation?
Well, I appreciate you asking that because have you ever seen my position on those in public?
No.
There's a reason. I find it insanely boring. It's not interesting at all, even slightly to me, for a couple of reasons. Number one, again, historically, until recently, I've only worked with pretty elite professional athletes. So if this is not something that's going to help them, I don't have any interest, right? So am I likely, should I ever advocate? Is there a situation in which I would have a professional athlete do any? Never. Like, this is not optimizing performance. If this is keeping you out of disease, as I just mentioned, that's not what I do. I don't really care about that stuff. If this is going to make me win a world championship or help me improve to win an MVP or get an all-star game, then I'm interested. I'm listening. If not, this is you all whining in the wind about nothing. Like, I really just don't care. Now, there are billions of people, and so some small nuance might still affect millions. And that's really important for those millions of people. So I'm happy those conversations are happening. I'm happy it's pushing scientists to be more nuanced and to think better and to accept and go after ideas that they just threw away, to put research behind that. That's really important. It's just not really going to affect me in my life with what I do in my career, so I don't really care about it. I also find it to be the same argument recycled over and over and over again on both sides, on all sides, on many of the sides. And then finally, I just don't ever see it as something that is generally sustainable. And what I don't mean by there is, I could give you an example of somebody eating this. Oh, sure, fine, don't really care, right? Is this going to be solving first principles, right? First principles are huge to me. And if the answer is no, then I'm out. I don't really care. I could give you a billion examples of other ones that have come in and out of the lexicon. Fine, don't care. Some of them, again, you can pick your nuances. If it's not based on their physiology, if it's not based on their situation, their demands, I'm not doing it. I don't really care. And so you can pull those things apart if you want. It's just super uninteresting to me. To me, it's kind of the equation of, when I teach my students, or my athletes, I tell them, look, if you're going to ask me, show me a food item, and you're going to ask me how bad it is for you, I'm not going to answer that question. You're playing a game, a shitty game, of what is the least bad thing. That's so not interesting. That's the wrong framing. It should be, what is the most good? What is the best thing I can do, right? If I'm not playing optimization, I really don't care. And that's just for me personally with what I do professionally. That's what I'm at. Again, I acknowledge the other stuff is important for a lot of reasons, and arguably society more important, more people affected. That's just not really what I spend my time doing. Yeah,
it makes sense. But there is an interesting evolution happening that I've perceived, where for a long time there was this separation, this divide between people that were interested primarily in lifespan and health span and chronic disease prevention, and those that were interested in fitness and performance, right? But now there's this incredible convergence happening where it's starting to come to light that the same steps that we might take for a stronger, more able body, right, actually also are not counterproductive and in fact very productive to promoting a healthy lifespan and health span.
Yeah, I'm smiling because this has been my whole career, right? I remember, so I was a high school athlete and was fortunate enough to play college football as well. So I remember going into that and thinking, like, I want to go into an academic field of high performance. And this is part of why I went into muscle physiology and bioenergetics, is I wanted to know more about like sport performance, but I didn't care about the athletic training side of it. I didn't care about the public health side of it. And there was just really no field for me to go in. There are now. There are programs like mine, but there's nothing like this, right? So I'm kind of in this like limbo of exercise epidemiology, kind of in like public health, and then athletic training. I'm like, this is not really what I'm after. So fast forward, as a doctoral student, one of our courses, our academic courses I took, was in the medical school. Now this is really cool. So I'm taking medical physiology. The teacher is a PhD though. So he's a PhD in physiology. I'm a PhD in our side, and then the rest are medical students, right? And I just remember being so confused and like half smiling going through that course, because almost it felt like everything we were talking about that is extreme high risk of death is the same thing you'd see in high performance, right? Give you a great example. If somebody said, hey, I got a patient came in and they've got a total blood volume of 7 liters. My initial instinct is like, wow, that dude's super fit, right? Like that is a classic adaptation of endurance exercise, more total blood in your body.
More total blood in your body
Way
is a like proxy for what? Health? Fitness?
It's an actual adaptation.
Wow.
It's not even a proxy, it's a direct adaptation. You'll have more total blood volume post-fitness and pre-fitness.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it this way, the quick answer is if you increase the amount of red blood cells you have and you fix the volume, then viscosity got higher. What I'm saying is this would be a measure of hematocrit, right? So if you have the same amount of red blood cells and the same amount of blood volume, that gets really thick, right? So that's a problem that's going to have all kinds of issues. It's like sludge going through your system. It's going to have issues. So what you do in response to that is bring in more total fluid so that you keep the concentration the same. You just expand the total volume. So you'll have more total blood volume. The average man is walking around probably in the neighborhood of 4.5 total liters. A high-level athlete, 6.
Wow.
Something like that. Fun actual note, I actually ran this number the other day for fun. At maximal exercise, so there's, I'll get back, I promise. This is a cool thing I think you'll appreciate knowing. So at rest, there's a measure called cardiac output. And so what that means is how much blood you're pumping out of your heart per pump, that's called stroke volume, multiplied by how many times it's pumping. That's your heart rate. So you take your heart rate, multiply that by how much blood's pumping out, and that gives you your cardiac output. So at rest, again, you're looking at something like, 3.5, 4, maybe 5 liters of blood per minute. So every given minute, you're putting out about 4 liters. That's something in the stratosphere of a gallon, right? Which is pretty cool. Close. At maximum exercise, most people are going to get to something like 25 liters per minute. So you're going to 5x your resting to maximal output, right? However, the highest number I actually have found is closer to 45. So you have individuals who are able to kick out 45 liters per minute, which is equivalent of, I think the number was about 12 gallons of blood per minute.
Wow.
You're cruising that much blood through your body in any given minute. Remember, you're doing it while exercising, so you're constricting and contracting muscle, and you're blocking the blood flow to get it through. And you have enough strength, and I mean physical strength in your heart, to contract so hard you can pump the blood out of there all the way through your muscle that is contracting back up in your blood at a rate of, again, about, in this case, 12 gallons in a given minute. So I think that put you at something like 1,500 ounces per second.
Wow.
Or something like that, which considering this glass of water is, I don't know, 8, 10, 12, like something like that.
Is that related to ejection fraction?
Yeah, ejection fraction is a percentage of the blood that's in the left ventricle that comes out per pump. So if you had 100 milliliters of blood in the ventricle and 50% came out on the contraction, your ejection fraction is 50%.
Wow.
So from a medical perspective, the reason I'm saying this is the same exact example. You would look at ejection fraction as a clear sign of cardiovascular stress, like you're about to have a heart attack, just had a heart attack, like something like that, right?
With a lower ejection fraction, right?
Right. Like I think the number there clinically is sub 85% or something is the threshold. That could be wrong. It's been 15 years. So give me a little break on that one. But the point is, if you were to see somebody that had a total blood volume of 6.5 liters, I'd be thinking super fit. And a doctor would be thinking, get this guy on diuretics immediately. He's going to die. Because blood volume's up, blood pressure is going to be up. Like you're both right here.
Wow.
And so I always had this juxtaposition, right? Same thing with electrolyte concentrations. Like you just sort of name all the stuff going around. And I'm like, man. So initially I was so confused. And then I remember getting into the section of the course where we talked about like diabetes prevention, right? And we're just going through all this stuff. And, you know, we're going through, now in medical school, like in this particular course, you're going through medical chapters in a couple of hours, right? So you're going to do multiple chapters per day because the whole course is jammed into these tight windows, right? So the amount of information you get is just insane. And I remember just sitting there going through just like medications and things like that for diabetes. I'm just like, man, this is so insane. Like this is so kilter. But the guy was awesome, right? I could tell like something was turning in his head. And then he got to the very end and he was like, oh, wait a minute, we forgot one. And oh, by the way, this is the most and you know where I'm going with this. This is the most impactful one. It beats all these medications. And he just ran through the numbers, effectiveness in clinical trials, a magnitude of effect, likelihood of effect, all these things. And everyone's just like ready to smash it down, right? And he's just like, and he just throws the pen down. He goes, and uses a word, maybe, I don't know if you can swear in this program or not.
Swear, feel free.
But he said, it's fucking exercise. And I'm just like, wow, and like jump off my desk and I'm like, finally, we're talking about the right things. So at the same time, like we're going through things like leg strength. We're going through things like VO2 max. And the whole time I'm thinking, yo, why do you care about some esoteric number like ejection fraction, which is important, when you have a direct measure of heart function in something like a VO2 max test? Why aren't we doing that? Like, why are we not considering that as a marker of health? Why aren't we looking at how strong people are, right? Now, I'm an exercise physiologist, so I'm clearly biased to that stuff. And then, right at the end of the semester, I was fortunate. Jonathan Myers came in. Yeah, he's at Stanford, legendary, we'll call him cardiovascular scientist, if you will. And he gave a talk, and he started walking through Stephen Blair's original work. Now, this original paper, kind of the most famous one, was already out in 1989. So this has been around for over a decade at this point, well, almost 2 decades. And he just showed such remarkable and clear associations between VO2 max and cardiovascular risk. And I was like, wow, like finally one of these heart dudes gets it. Like this is what we should be going after. As the data go on and on, it's like not only is it a significant predictor of how long you're going to live, it is far more significant than almost any other traditional markers, right? Again, not to say those are not important. If you have heart disease, like work with your doctor, like caveat. But nothing will outpace VO2 max.
Wow.
So as an exercise scientist person, I'm like, yes, we should be doing that. And then the work starts coming on board with maximal strength, leg strength, grip strength, total amount of muscle mass. Muscle strength is more important than quality. And we start getting all these factors. And in my head, I'm like, yo, this is a health combine. All this is take the exact same thing we're doing for athletes that are going through the combine process, which is like a preseason testing, thing. It's the same, right? Okay, great. What do people look like for their cardiovascular fitness? How much muscle do they have? How strong they are? You stack those 3 things up, and that's going to outpredict how long you're going to live and how well you're going to live than almost any other medical test you could possibly come up with.
Even more than like blood biomarkers, like a lot of people are talking these days about like ApoB and LDL cholesterol. People love to argue about the value of those. Yeah,
and again, those are like, I don't even want to speak to how good those are or not good. That's not really what I focus on. But if you stack up things like that, depending on which paper you want to pull from, don't get hung up on this exact number. It ranges. But you want to see things like if you increase your risk of mortality, they're going to use generally what are called hazard ratios, right? So a hazard ratio of 1.0 kind of means the standard. If you go to 1.5, that means you've increased 50%. 1.1 is a 10%. So that number behind the 1 is kind of like the percentage. Going from 1 to 2 is doubling.
Right.
So if you want to stack things like smoking, cardiovascular disease, known family history, cholesterol markers, etc., these oftentimes move that number like from 1 to 1.3, 1.1, 1.4, like something like that.
And that's relative risk,
totally.
Right? Yeah.
Totally, right? An important distinction there, right? Very important distinction. You definitely want to pay attention to relative and absolute. But if you stack up things like going from, you could pick so many examples, going from moderately fit to unfit, you're going to see 2X's,
wow.
2.5's, 3's, 4's, right? Going from least fit to most fit, 4X's. And so it's not to say that, hey, as long as you're in shape, none of those things matter. Like not even close. Absolutely get all those things checked out. Follow whatever doctor decides there. It's just showing like how important or how much you're leaving off the table if you're not accounting for your overall fitness. Strength is going to give you similar numbers, right? And so depending on the studies that are looked at, strength will outperform VO2 max, sometimes the opposite. But the point is, like, if you're not paying attention to that, you're looking at combined hazard ratios of like, 4x, 6x, 8x, just really big. And you stack, smoking on top of bad cholesterol and you're at like, 1.6. Like,
wow.
Like it can be that small. Like, again, smoking will definitely kill you. Do not do it. I really don't want to undermine those things at all. You can I'm clearly trying to be there. But
of course, but what you're saying is that it's like it's orders of magnitude more of an effect that you get from going.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
It really can be. And so I think kind of going back a while, you asked, like, is it important to differentiate between
the different exercise modalities?
And this is my answer would have been yes. And here's the reason why. At least differentiating between strength and cardiovascular endurance is critically important because they're independent predictors, right? They will stack on top of each other, but they're also independent. We also have so much data from lifelong exercisers. This is some work I've done and published. Colleagues of mine have done this. There's a paper that came out just in the last couple of weeks that showed this, but it's so incredibly clear. I'm happy to go into those papers if you want, but just to jump to the end, it's so incredibly clear if you only do one of those modes, strength training or endurance, you're leaving a lot of health on the table. And so this is why I would make that argument. You really do need to have both of them. They're independent. They are helping you stay alive for different reasons. And we have the direct evidence of these lifelong exercisers that they're just not in the best place if they don't do both.
I love strength training, and I'm not the biggest fan of cardio. I don't really enjoy running. Is vigorous walking a sufficient replacement? No, it's not.
It's better than nothing. Again, if we're talking about what is least bad versus optimal. So I don't want you to hear that and think, all right, that's it, I'm out. Like, I'm done, right? It's not an excuse to not do it. If vigorous walking is all you can get into, that's great.
That's like what some people refer to as zone 2.
Yeah, I don't care what zone like you're in at all. That's like very little concern to me generally. If you want to, I'll put it this way. I think it's clear that you need to be doing something that requires you to sustain energy output at a higher than resting rate for long periods of time. Okay, define that as zone whatever you want. I don't really care. Again, I have friends that are like so deep into zone 2. They've made careers out of this. Amazing. Like, that's great. You want to pull your blood and figure out what your lactate levels are. That's amazing. I don't really care. I have other ways that we pay attention to that, but that's fine. You need to clearly be able to sustain exercise or energy output that's elevated for a long period of time. Awesome. I think that's inarguable.
What might that look like? I mean, are you jogging, bike riding,
sure,
hiking?
It could be a vigorous walk. Any of those things. Could be rucking. It could be on a rower. It could be in a fitness class. It could be any number of things that you want it to be. I think what's important to understand here is it's not the mode of exercise that matters. It rarely is. Right? It's the physiological demand. So what you need to be doing is asking for an advanced cardiovascular rate that is sustained with no break. That's all we're after. The mode or method you pick is entirely up to you on the surface. It's irrelevant to this aspect of physiology. It's very relevant to other parts, joint health or movement patterns, personal preference, availability to stuff, fine. But right now for this physiological output, we just simply care about asking a sustained input. It's rarely about, unless you're an athlete or have a specific muscle you want to work at for injury prevention or recovery, or if you're in an aesthetic sport, exercise is not really about the output. It's the input that matters, right? It's what's the physiological demand. The easy way to think about this is the physiological limiter will be the place of adaptation. So what I mean by that is wherever in your physiology is asked to fail is going to be the place that adapts. So in this particular case, if you're saying, hey, we're struggling to maintain a 25% increase in output of exercise, of energy, and we're struggling to maintain that, wherever part of your physiology is struggling is going to adapt. So maybe that's your breathing. Maybe that's the mechanics of your posture. Maybe that has nothing to do with that, and it is your ability to bring in and utilize fat as a fuel. Maybe it has nothing to do with that, and it is your gait and how you're walking, and that's why your knee is hurting. That's why you're like, it could be any number of things. So that's, if it is a situation where you're like, man, every time I walk or jog lightly, I get these back injuries, then don't do that anymore. It's not worth it, right? Find another way to ask for cardiovascular demand. Find a way that is not leading to injury. If you care to fix your running, great. If you don't, then don't. Don't worry about it, right? Like whatever's in for you. So it could look like any number of things. I really don't care how you get about that, but sustained output is the goal in a way, as I just mentioned, that is sustainable. This is a long-term play that we need consistently over long periods of time. You are really in this for the long haul. The same thing with our athletes that have short demands on performance, right? So if we have a competition 6 weeks from now, it's the same thing. This is still an investment in 6 weeks from now, right? We're going to be needing to do this for a lot of reasons. Outside of that, you clearly need to be able to perform at a high heart rate as well. This can be done in any number of ways. Short, high-intensity intervals. Like think your classic 20, 30, 40 seconds, maybe up to a minute of hard work, some sort of matched recovery. Maybe this is less recovery than work. So maybe this is 60 seconds of hard work and 30 seconds of rest. Maybe it's the opposite, 30 seconds of work, more rest. They're different. That gives you a little bit of fun stuff. I actually think people should do like a combination of these. Maybe it's a little bit longer, 2 or 3 minutes of sustained work, 2 or 3 minutes of rest. Like fine. You're challenging your ability to go to a max or near max heart rate. That is going to ask different physiological demands than the lower intensity stuff. So by leaving that stuff out of the equation, you are leaving adaptations out of the equation. Just like by only going red line, only going high heart rate, max heart rate, and not doing anything at a moderate or lower is also leaving things off the table. So I really think you need both. It's hard to come up with a situation in which both of them combined at some point are not advantageous.
Well, what is like a minimal effective routine then that doesn't require one to be a professional athlete and dedicate all of their free time to exercise to achieve these adaptations?
Minimum effective dose is a little bit different because you need to think about, are we talking maintenance of current status or are we talking about actual improvement, right? So maintenance of current status, it is insanely low. If you were to do, say, one strength training workout every 2 weeks or so, that's probably sufficient to maintain muscle size and strength.
Interesting.
It can be very, very low. You're talking about even a few sets total over a couple of weeks. There's actually a good amount of research on that you can sustain decent amount of strength. Can you optimize and increase? Probably not. Cardiovascular output would be the same. Actually, this is actually kind of fun. If you look at speed to strength to endurance and then muscle mass, is a very clear progression or reduction of these over time, such that speed is hard to maintain. If you really want to maximize power output, this will fall off fast. It will fall off fast with detraining, and it will fall off fast with age. So if you were to plot world records in things like the marathon, compare those to world records in strength-based sports like powerlifting, and you compare that to world records in sprinting, and you look at what happens to those world records as we go from age 30 to 35 to 40, kind of in 5-year increments, the speed ones will drop off the reservation. Like they're just gone really fast. You will not see somebody who is a competitive world sprinter at 45. You can absolutely see a competitive endurance athlete. In fact, many of the world records won't happen until folks are 30, 35 or so years old.
Wow. And
that the difference between the world record of a 50-year-old versus a 35-year-old is like not much. But if you look at that in 100-meter dash, it's like the difference between 9.58 and like 12 seconds. Like
wow.
It's like it's not even in the stratosphere of competitive. So speed will go off fast, strength will go off fast, but maintaining hypertrophy and maintaining endurance is really, really simple. We actually did a study years ago looking at taper in cross-country runners. So this is really cool. These were competitive college cross-country runners, and we did biopsies of them. We did VO2 max testing. We did an actual competition, like their actual national or conference championships were part of the data collection. And we looked at them pre and post 3 weeks of taper. Now, over the course of that taper, they ended up reducing running volume by 50%. VO2 max didn't go anywhere. Stayed the exact same, right? No change. We looked at a number of markers in muscle tissue of aerobic capacity. None of those moved. No reduction whatsoever. We saw an improvement in performance, though. They ran faster in the post race than they did. So we lost no cardiovascular markers whatsoever, up and down. We looked at them all over the place. We did, though, see a dramatic increase in the size, and I think it was about 9% or so, can't remember exactly, of the fast twitch muscle fibers. So we saw a large increase in fast twitch muscle fiber size with 3 weeks of reduced training. So what we're saying here, there in that particular case, is there probably was a little bit of suppression due to fatigue and some other stuff going on. But the point is, they cut their training in half and they were terrified. by the way.
Wow.
Because like endurance runners, like you take mileage away and they're like,
Yeah.
they get really. But we saw nothing. So the grand point I'm making there is endurance is fairly stable, very minimal doses. If you were to do one, again, I don't know an exact paper here, but if you were to do one session, say 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, maybe 4 of those, right? So repeat that 4 times. You did that once every couple of weeks. I would imagine it would probably keep your VO2 max reasonably close.
And is that what people refer to as HIIT, high intensity interval training?
There is no specific definition of that. That would be one of them anyways, but there are many, many other ways to do high intensity interval training. So traditionally, we reserve that definition to be anything super maximal. So meaning above your VO2 max, which means it's anaerobic. But I guess colloquially, yeah, sure. Like super short bouts of like truly maximum. The one real key there is in order for that to be effective, they truly have to be maximal or very, very close. You can't go kind of give 85%, or now you're just doing like a little bit of work for a very short amount of time, which is the combination of not going to cause many adaptations.
Is that, and so that, just to recap, that can help to preserve fast twitch muscle fibers?
In that particular case, I think that was a little bit of a fluke there. The only thing you can really do to preserve fast twitch muscle fibers is force.
So like resistance training.
Yeah, but specifically even heavy.
Interesting.
Like it really has to be there. I could go into physiology that why, but you really need requirements for force. The paper that just came out last couple of weeks on longevity showed just that. So looked at lifelong strength trainers, which is really dope. Like finally we start to get some people that get some love for some strength trainers for 50 years, right? We have all this research on lifelong runners and stuff for decades. But now finally getting the age where people, it's really cool. Like people, like this is my passion. I apologize right now. You might not be interested, but if you look at the history of exercise physiology, it's dominated by endurance, right? For the most part. And there's good reasons for that, but the most easy explanation is the people who got into exercise physiology as a profession just liked endurance. Like there's no grand conspiracy there. Like it came from Harvard Fatigue Lab and the need to understand fatigue for military purposes and industry purposes. What can the body handle and stuff. So it was really fatigue resistance. It didn't matter if you could jump higher. Like that's not really like a thing. It was about keeping people alive at war and industry going. But nonetheless, most of the people that went into that, so Harvard Fatigue Lab kind of started everything. And then from there launched out a whole bunch of scientists. 1956, you got a combination of things happen. You got summit of Everest. You've got the sub 4-minute mile got broke. In the same couple of years, you have the development of the American College of Sports Medicine, as well as the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And so really this is endurance feat, endurance feat, endurance feat. We're still launching into more wars. We're the launching of the industry complex. Like we need people to be working in factories for long periods of time, et cetera, right? And so there's this giant boom of figuring out, man, what do I eat? What's the minimum amount of calories I can give somebody and they can sustain up? But what am I even burning during exercise when I'm working hard? And so like all this classic exercise physiology, nutrition, recovery, the launching of things like, carbohydrates are really helpful, like for exercise and performance. All this stuff starts coming on board. And so that's just attracting people to go into those fields who like that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So we're getting Prefontaine, and he starts getting into exercise physiology. Real scientists are studying him, and he becomes such a large figure in life, and now people are coming into the field, right? And so for the first 30 years or so, it was really dominated by endurance exercise. There's a small number of scientists that are into strength training, like you and I, and all this stuff, and like I gravitated to those guys, right? Like it was so cool meeting Paritesh and working with him on some studies, because he's like one of the first guys to do biopsies on powerlifters and bodybuilders and stuff, and you're like, dope, like that muscle looks different. That's really cool. So we start getting moving in this field, but it really wasn't until like kind of my generation where you started having these people coming on board. We're like, yo, I'm going into this field and I'll deal with you endurance people, but like I really want to see what happens when we strength train, when we lift weights, when we do this stuff. But that's really because of Arnold.
Yeah, I was literally just going to say that it's only the past 30 or so years where the proliferation of gyms and resistance training as a leisure time physical pursuit have become popularized. Like
totally.
My mom and dad's generation, the idea of exercising for health was, I think, dominated by aerobic exercise.
Always, right?
Yeah.
We have this lore of if you want to lose weight, if you want to be cardiovascularly fit, if you want to be healthy, it is endurance exercise. It is bike, swim, run, right? Oh, lifting weights, that's for sports or aesthetics, right? Now, hopefully, over the last Now, clearly over the last 15 or so years, we've started to cross that barrier of like, yo, both are important for like both sides here, right? Lifelong exercise or research, fine. Even mechanism research, like you pick the way you want to dice this stuff up, right? And we started to put all these things forward. I told you that story of being in med school. I could tell you a billion more stories, but it was really, really cool going through graduate school when this was happening, right? So I get to see this in front of my eyes, and I was screaming it from like my cubicles as a graduate student for years, right? Nobody paid attention. I'm like, man, there's this stuff coming on board with high intensity interval training. This is just as effective for something like VO2 Max's long duration, and just getting like basically shit on, like, right? And then being like, yo, there's different types of strength training. No, there's 3 sets of 10 at 70%. And it's like, that's really what strength training is. And being like, no, there's power. Like, there's all these different things, right? And this should be a performance. Like, if you want to perform at your best, it's the same basic principles. It doesn't matter if you want to apply that to hit a ball better or whatever, or if you just want to be, it's the same if you have a body or an athlete, right? Like, that's why I always use that saying. It's the same damn thing. So watching this field move and then watching it get into the lexicon of the world is especially here, it's been like so cool watching, like, yes, now you guys are catching on. Like, now you're catching on. Exercise scientists, we had it right all along. Like, trust us. We're not just like the dorks that are really, oh, you're a PE major guys, right? Like, our field has always kind of come from that forgotten child of like, oh, there's medicine, and there's the real doctors, and then, oh, like you PE teachers, right? You're like, great. Well, now it's like, okay, well, who got it right?
Well, it's like when I was growing up, the nerds were you didn't want to be a nerd, but now, I mean, all you want to do is be a nerd, right? Because
everyone wants to be a scientist, right?
Yeah, everybody wants to be a scientist, and also the wealthiest people, the most powerful people on the planet today are those that were considered nerds probably for the majority of their childhood and adolescence.
Yeah. So what I was getting at was, because of Arnold and because of strength training came on board, like the ability for us to change and literally become a superhero. I mean, this became a real thing, right? Like, our entire generations of people being like, holy hell, like, I can literally make myself a superhero. This is insane, right? You have this in sports, and University of Nebraska starts taking off, and like all these things start coming out of like, look what happens to you when you lift weights. It's like, oh my, like that was so, like running better for more miles, like it didn't really get everybody, right? But this one got. So now you've got something for both sides of the equation. So because of that, research starts coming on board, right? But it really launches off, I'd say 20 years ago. When again, there's people that started getting interested in strength training in the 1980s, and certainly the 90s, started getting PhDs, started going to become laboratories, started learning chemistry, started learning psychology, started learning brain function and neuroscience, right? Like, now we start getting this level of research, but for these questions. So just now we're getting to the age where we've got these lifelong lifters. We've got plenty of people who've been running since the 60s and 70s, but now it's been 30 years, 40 years. You have these early adopters, and so we can look at people who are 60 years old who started lifting when they were 20, 25. And so more and more of that research is coming on board. But to go back to your original question, it's saying the same thing that has been actually in the exercise physiology textbooks for 25 years, which is you're probably going to be the most healthy when you do a combination of strength training and endurance.
And so strength training, insofar as it really helps to maintain and promote the development of fast twitch muscle fibers, I saw on Instagram, you wrote, preserving muscle with aging is almost exclusively a fast twitch fiber problem. And so lifelong aerobic exercise, then, it's really underserved, these muscle fibers, which seem to play such an important role in terms of our strength and mobility as we get older.
Well, I would say they wouldn't be underserved. They'll be gone. They'll be gone. That's extremely clear. Those fibers will be gone if you don't use them. So the way that it kind of works is your muscles function on what's called the size principle. And so what this means is you will start activation. So if you actually do exactly what we just did a second ago, you picked up that glass of water and slowly moved it towards your mouth, right? And you did it in a controlled fashion. You ideally, most likely, I assume, didn't want to slam that glass off your face.
Right.
True or false?
True.
Great. And so the way that you did that is you told your muscles, I need to activate force production. We need to contract. So the way human movement works is 3 major components. Some sort of neural innervation, central nervous system, right? So turn it on. Muscles are number 2. Muscles have to contract. And then really what people sort of forget is muscles don't make bones move, right? Muscles are have connective tissue wrapped around them. Those come together to form a tendon. That attaches to bone. So you pull on that, that makes you move. So the three major steps there: nervous, muscle, and connective tissue. Great. So I need to pick this glass up with a small amount of force, but not too much so it doesn't jam it in my face. What I do is I start by activating the muscle fibers that are in what we call low threshold motor units. So the way that works is, again, when you think muscle, you actually have a combination of muscles in a muscle. So I don't have a bicep muscle. I have many biceps muscles. Within each of those biceps muscles, I have thousands of individual muscle fibers. Okay, those muscle fibers are what truly contract. They are innervated by almost unlimited number of nerves that come in. But we tend to group them in batches. And so in large muscles like the glutes, like the glute max, like the biggest, strongest muscle you've got, that's probably got, 1,000 or more individual muscle fibers per motor unit. So one nerve comes in and it activates over 1,000 muscle fibers. Muscles in like your fingertip or your eye maybe have 100. And so what this allows us to say is, like in the eyeball, for example, we need extremely fine movement. And so I'm going to have a lot of nerves go in there. Each nerve controls a very small number of muscle fibers so that I can have extreme control of where I'm moving and focusing on. In the glutes, I don't need precision of movement, right? I need massive force production in the same exact plane, right? Now, you can't alter force production in a muscle fiber. It is an on or off switch, just like the lights here. I can flick them on or off. They contract at 100% of their strength and velocity every single time, period. There is no alteration of force production at the level of the muscle fiber. Not something I have the ability to do. So when I need to alter force production, like in the case of the glass, what I do is change the amount of motor units that I turn on, right? So I go to pick this up and I realize, oh man, my initial instinct was that this glass would be empty. So I've turned on, let's just make a number, it's made up, 5 motor units. Okay, I put on 5 motor units in my biceps muscles, right? Biceps brachii. And I realized initially, in fact, if you do this really slowly, do this for me real fast, pull up just very slightly where it doesn't actually come off the ground. You can feel like some tension in your biceps, right? Slight amount. What's actually happening there is you're realizing this is not enough force. And so you slowly turn on more until it just lifts off the ground, right? You ever see anybody like deadlift? And they start pulling on the bar, doesn't move, then all of a sudden, like 3 seconds later, it comes up.
Yeah.
You're watching that in real life. That's exactly what's happening, right? So their body's realizing, I need more motor units, they turn on more. I need more, that's not enough. I turn on more until I've got enough motor units turned on that is sufficient, but not any more, to lift that glass up.
Okay, so you're not modulating the amount of force that's being produced by those muscle fibers. You're modulating the amount of muscle fibers that you're recruiting
via
for a given task.
Motor units.
Wow.
Yep. So I've got it. That's my way of controlling force. So that being said, that there are specific motor units that are low threshold, meaning any activation gets them to turn on. And there are others that are intentionally high threshold. It doesn't always line up this way, but for our conversation, let's just think of it as the low threshold ones are slow twitch fibers. The high threshold are fast twitch. Makes intuitive sense. Slow twitch fibers are slower, but they are extremely fatigue resistant. So think of your soleus, your spinal erectors, things that are meant to be fighting gravity, keeping you awake, or keeping you vertical rather, erect, moving, on all day. I don't need you to produce a lot of force, but I need you on all day. Fast twitch fibers generally have the opposite. So the amount of these fibers that you have from person to person is wildly different, and the amount that you have from muscle to muscle is wildly different. And that structure follows function. So spinal erectors are slow twitch, meant to be on all day. Hamstrings are more fast twitch, meant to explode and jump, right? So the way that I do this is I go and I start with my slow twitch motor units, because not only am I not going to produce excessive force, but it's going to be more metabolically efficient. I'm not wasting energy. I don't need this energy quickly, and so I can utilize our slower energy sources, so fat. I can save my creatine. I can spare that. I can spare my muscle glycogen. I don't need that much work, right? Now I need to do that thing as heavy as possible. I doubled the weight of that. I tripled it. I put it as a maximum deadlift. I'm going to still start with those same slow twitch fibers. They will always be activated. And so these muscle fibers and motor units in total are activated almost entirely across the force spectrum, because you always start with them, right? We're going to continue to start there. It's like a dominoes, right? I'm always going to start with the very first domino. If I need more, I do excessive. If I don't, I just stay there. So those ones are always activated. It doesn't matter what you do. Activities of daily living will keep those alive. In fact, if those things go off board or offline, you're not moving anyways. However, if I never put myself in a position to really demand force, and I mean really demand force, as we go up that chain of threshold, those things never get turned on. Eventually they die. So now I've gone 15 days, 15 months, 15 years, and I've never activated that motor unit. Sayonara.
The motor units that control the fast twitch muscle
Correct.
fibers.
So those muscle fibers are particularly susceptible to being lost over time. Now, there's a lot of things that can happen to them, but the muscle fibers oftentimes will stay around. As we age, we will lose muscle fibers quite clearly. But a lot of them will stay around. What can happen, not always, and there's a little bit of controversy on this fairly, but what can happen that's been documented is a thing called a batching, right? And so the muscle fibers, when you have these fast and slow ones, they're actually spread throughout the muscle evenly. So all those muscles in a motor unit are not laying next to each other, right? Because if you did, you'd have kind of a lack of control. You'd have spasticity and like all kinds of weird movement. And so they're kind of spread throughout. So one motor unit, if it has 10 fibers, it might be one on the far left, one on the far right, one way in the muscle belly, one on top. They're kind of spread throughout the muscle to get a smooth contraction. And so you start losing those motor neurons. Those muscle fibers that are still alive, they have no activation anymore. And so the other neurons that are alive will extend and grow new dendrites, activate those other muscle fibers, and put them as a part of their motor unit.
Whoa.
And so you're adding to the number of those motor units, and those, again, tend to be slow motor units because those are the ones that are still alive. And you get this batching or patching together of things. And this is why you've got this, well, it's one of the many reasons why you've got less fine control of movement as you age, especially like towards the end. Again, one of the many reasons. It's not all muscle. I'll grant you that, neuroscience dorks, right? You get some argument there. So that is one of the things that could potentially happen. And again, it's not the slow twitch fibers that are at risk, it's the fast ones, because they're only going to be activated in those special circumstances. And so you can do tons of endurance training if you want and have really nice, healthy, high-functioning slow twitch fibers, which you definitely want. This is a very good thing for your overall health for a lot of reasons. But you need to do something to keep those other ones alive as well.
Therein lies the resistance training revolution.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Keep them going. Again, there's really clear evidence of that, keeping those fibers alive. In fact, this is like one of the major, if you look at any of the research on sarcopenia, which is the advanced loss of muscle with age, there's actually some pushback very recently saying like we need to define sarcopenia differently, where it needs to account for fast twitch fiber loss, because it's not just about the total amount of fibers or the size. There's going to be some loss of muscle size with age. But if we're not accounting the functionality of that muscle, then we're like really starting to have improper conversations, right? Because if I lose muscle but I maintain function, I'm still probably okay. Again, functionality is more important than total mass for long-term health.
So stressing the muscles with heavy resistance training.
Yeah.
And heavy means heavy for you, right?
Absolutely. That's a great point. It's heavy for you. That's always relative, right? So you don't have to start as heavy. Like you can get there. You can take a very long time to get there. It can be whatever heavy means to you in whatever form or fashion. If you like machines, great. If you hate machines, great. If you like kettlebells, phenomenal. If you would rather push a sled up a hill, great. If you want to drag a backpack up a mountain, it doesn't really, again, it's not the outward part that matters. If you're in a sport like powerlifting or weightlifting, then the exercise selection matters for the outcome, because now we're here for a different thing, right? We're here for the outward part of it. If you're simply doing this for the sake of health, and it's not irrelevant, but for this aspect, all that really matters is the physiological challenge.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. What is, you've mentioned it a few times, VO2 max. What actually is VO2 max, and how do we improve it?
Yeah, so the equation here, the easiest way to think about this is what's called the Fick, F-I-C-K equation. Famous scientist, everybody knows Adolf Fick.
Except for me.
No, right. Science nerds. He's a brilliant guy, actually. I think in like 18-something or others. He's a guy actually that I think you may fact check this, but I'm pretty sure he won a Nobel Prize for diffusion. So he's like a physicist initially and then came up with this stuff too. His nephew, actually, I think, was the guy who invented contact lenses.
Oh, interesting.
Smart family.
Yeah, seriously.
Most of what I just told you is true, but maybe not all of it. That last part is true, but some of the details are off. Point is, Fick equation, okay?
We'll submit to the fact checkers.
Yeah.
No, we won't. Maybe.
Yeah.
No, we won't.
Clean up my history. The point is, look, if you want to kind of adjust the Fick equation, I think the easy way to understand it is this. So your VO2 max equals cardiac output multiplied by what's called AVO2 difference. So to refresh, cardiac output is heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. How much you're pumping out multiplied by how much is coming out per pump. You multiply that by what's called AVO2 difference. Now, AVO2 stands for artery minus venous oxygen. So it's the difference in oxygen between the arterial side and the venous side. Well, here's what that means. When your blood leaves your heart, it's oxygenated. That's the point, right? So you goes into the lungs, gets filled up with oxygen, goes to the heart distributes it out, right? So when it leaves your heart, it has the most and the highest concentration of oxygen that it will ever have. When it comes back, it has the least amount, right? So it goes back in, it dumps CO2 into the lungs dump the CO2 out, exchange it for oxygen, come back. Okay, great. So the difference between going away and out of your heart, the arterial side, and returning to your heart, the venous side, is determined by how much you stole along the way. Who took it and where to go? Great. So to make this easy, let's use one example. This is, say, the vastus lateralis, the outside quadricep muscle. So you pumped from your blood or pumped from your heart full of oxygen, and let's just say it had 100 molecules of oxygen. Make math easy here. And it went into your vastus lateralis. And it came back out of your vastus lateralis, and instead of having 100 that went in, 80 came out. That tells you the tissue, the muscle, took 20. Okay. So 100 minus 80 would be an AVO2 difference of 20. Right? That's not a good score. We want this number to be high, right? Because it's a multiplier. Cardiac output multiplied by VO2 difference. So you want both sides of this equation to be as high as possible. So we want to be extracting the most amount of oxygen out of our blood that we possibly can. That's sort of the point. If not, it goes right back to the heart, already oxygenated, and like, what's the point?
Wouldn't using less oxygen, though, indicate a more efficient muscle?
Now, you've asked about efficiency, not maximum. So there's a difference between maximum ability and my efficiency. So we can run this whole train from resting to efficiency. Efficiency would be what we call submaximum. So at any given submaximal intensity, how efficient are you? All the way up to maximum. So we can go through all of them and you'll see. Let's just do that real quick. At rest, as we already talked about, your cardiac output is basically the same whether you're fit or not. So as we're sitting here right now, whether you're in great shape for your own self or maybe you've got hurt and tore your Achilles, blah, blah, your cardiac output doing this activity is about the same. Let's call it 5 liters per minute. Super small. So the blood's going through there, you're exchanging, you're cutting some out of there, that's great. As you continue to go, and let's just say we went for a light jog. We're both in misery, but we're out there jogging, right? We're probably not efficient because of mechanical issues and technique and like all that other real stuff, but just the physiology side of it. We're also probably not efficient because we're not used to spending time in that mode of exercise. What's that mean? Well, as we get up and we start moving, our heart rate's going to increase because our demand for oxygen goes up. All right, stroke volume's going to increase, so cardiac output gone up. So we went from a cardiac output of 5 liters per minute to 15. We're cruising along. We're not really maybe talking. This is called this like borderline zone 2, zone 3. Sure, great. At the same time, since we've increased blood flow into the tissue, we've vasodilated, right? Remember, CO2 is going to be a major determinant of vasodilation. I guess remember we haven't said that before, but that's a major determinant, right? So when we start playing this O2 CO2 game, we start changing vasoconstriction, vasodilation, right? This is why hyperventilating can give you headaches, things like that. When CO2 concentrations get too low, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is also why I would argue you should probably be paying attention to respiratory rate over almost anything else at night. And any other markers of like respiratory rate will tell you so much about your life. Let's come back to that if you're interested. Like there's a whole bunch of sneaky stuff there that people just totally miss.
For sure, because I have like a sleep tracker. So I mean, if there's something that I should be focusing on in particular,
I could change your life with that.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I just look at it and I look at my sleep score and that's pretty much it. My heart rate maybe, but I don't know what I'm looking at.
It's not a good use of that technology at all.
Yeah,
There's
dude.
way more gold you can get out of that.
Optimize me.
We will definitely do that. Let me guess. Can I, knowing nothing about your personal life, I'm going to go and guess you get a typical recovery score, sleep score, 85, 90, feel pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It means
Sounds
nothing.
about right. No?
It means nothing, right? Like, how much does that change your life?
Yeah, I mean, not a ton. I look at it and it's like, You know, I feel like it's a pat on the back for maybe going to bed at a reasonable time.
Okay, well, that's a good use of it, actually. Like, if it's an accountability tool, that's always a win, right? But do you actually know whether that's good, effective recovery sleep? You don't.
No, I have no idea.
Yeah, we can do better. We can do a lot better.
It's also these like devices have proprietary algorithms. I don't actually know what it's telling me.
There's a whole host of other issues there too. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of really good things for it. We can do a lot. We'll even talk afterwards. We could do a lot better.
Great.
Way better. I'll tell a lot of people right now too, but nonetheless. So we're cruising along there. We've gone up a little bit, and now we're trying to get more tissue into blood. We've gone vasodilation, so things are opened up bigger, which means we get more blood flow into the tissue. Okay, and so because of that, we're getting more nutrients in, getting more things in mitochondria. We're flowing stuff out, carbon dioxide, etc. Things are moving, and we're having a great. So both of these things have gone up. So now my VO2 at rest, very small, and let's say during moderate exercise, it is 20 milliliters per kilogram per minute. For you and I, that's probably would be like I'm guessing your VO2 max is double, plus, or triple that, right? Hopefully it's in the 50s or something, right? So we'll call this 50%, plus or minus, right? Good. So cardiac output, it's pretty same. It's doubled. VO2 is pretty much doubled, and we're cruising along. Now, if we were to repeat that exact same workout, same exact speed, same conditions, 6 weeks from now, and you and I went and got in great shape, and we came back, what you would see is cardiac output's the same. Okay, because the demand is still the same.
Yeah.
Right? But our heart rates would be much lower. So our heart rates are much lower because our stroke volume went up.
Got it.
I'm getting more out per pump, so I don't have to pump as often. This is exactly also why at rest, your resting heart rate goes down when you become more fit.
Stronger heart muscle.
Stronger heart muscle. Funny enough, it is the exact same thing as strengthening your skeletal muscle. There's a lot of similarities between cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, and there's a lot of differences too. But in this particular case, it is eccentric training, what's called preload. You jam a bunch of blood into your left ventricle. It gets slammed with it. It gets massively eccentrically strengthened, okay? This will then result in hypertrophy. This will, without changing chamber size, reducing chamber size. It'll also physically contract more. It is preload. Like you pre-stretch something, it snaps back harder. So you do that, and your stroke volume literally gets stronger. This is the way to strength train your heart. This is why high-intensity intervals work for VO2 max. It's not efficiency. It's not mitochondrial development. Maybe that some of that happens, really. But for the most part, you're playing a game of stroke volume. You're getting the heart really strong because you're smashing in a ton of blood really fast. It has to respond to that. It gets physically stronger. That's why high-intensity intervals are the strength training equivalent for the cardiovascular system. Right? So you do that, and then because you're pumping out more blood per pump, but our overall cardiac demand is the same, I can then reduce the amount of time I'm pumping. So my resting heart rate goes down. So why resting heart rate is such a phenomenal marker of just basic global health. Most of you can't measure your VO2 at rest. It takes equipment, but you can certainly measure heart rate.
Yeah, heart rate's easy to measure.
Giving you a proxy of it. You can't measure a VO2 difference. You can't measure stroke volume. So the one thing in that equation you can measure is heart rate.
Wow. And so VO2 max is really, is VO2 max when people talk about cardiorespiratory fitness?
Yes.
So yes, synonymous?
Same thing. Science-wise, when you say fitness, you mean VO2 max. That's exact. So any paper you see published that talks about that, they are specifically referring to VO2 max. So whether they directly measured it or they did an estimate, and there's lots of ways to estimate it. There's lots of ways to do sub-maximal versions or prediction equations, but they are specifically referring to VO2 max. Now, small important point there. A lot of terminology gets lost here. When we say VO2 max, we're referring to your VO2 max. But that doesn't mean your VO2 at submax.
Got it.
Right. So if I said, hey, right now, what's your VO2 max? I'd be asking, what is your maximum if you did a maximum test?
Got it.
If I said, what's your VO2 right now? Like that's not your VO2 max right now. That's
right.
Your VO2 right now is 5 or whatever.
Got it. That makes sense.
So it's your VO2, which means the volume of oxygen. That's what it's called. VO2.
Wow. Really important predictors for longevity.
Oh, again, they dial up everything, right?
And how do you measure it? Do you have to get one of those metabolic carts or whatever they're called?
Gold standard is to go into a laboratory and get it actually tested. This is actually not hard anymore. They're coming up all over the place. Depending on where you live, somewhere between $75 to $200. Get a VO2 max sense, which relative to your health is not affordable for everybody, certainly. But if you are in that range and you're spending double that on supplements or some other name of thing, what are you really doing here?
Yeah.
You can do any number of free ones. You could look up. There's tons of scientifically validated estimates. There's some things as simple as like a 2-minute step test. It literally takes you 2 minutes. You take your heart rate, you step up and down on a very small box for 2 minutes, you take your heart rate at the end, you plug in some other things into equations, and you can get an estimate.
Whoa.
They're decently good. You can do something as simple as like a 1.5 mile run. Like you take the time, if you have your heart rate, that's great, makes it a little bit better. But if you simply take your time on a 1.5 mile run, plug it in the equation, you'll get like a reasonable number as well.
Super cool. And those calculators are available online?
All of them, yeah. Been around for 30 years or most. And there's like hundreds of studies validating them. You're not going to get the same number as you get in a lab. You're not going to get a lot of their metrics that are important, but you're going to get pretty close. So estimating VO2 max is very simple to do. Again, as a direct maximal test or as even a submax test.
Wow.
So to kind of come back to the VO2 max, it's cardiac output multiplied by that AVO2 difference, right? All right, amazing. So as we went from rest, what's going to happen is your cardiac output will stay the same at rest, but again, we got there differently. We're more efficient. That's exactly what this means. From the AVO2 difference side, what's it mean to be efficient there? Well, a couple things. If I increase capillarization, which is the amount of capillaries I have in tissue, a very well-known adaptation of exercise, just a little more capillaries. That alone is going to get more blood exchange, right? So now I'm getting tissue in more effectively, which means I get a higher percentage of the oxygen out of the arteries to go into tissue. Because remember, we have a bit of a diffusion issue. If I smash a whole bunch of blood into a tiny muscle, it's going to go ripping through there really quickly. I only have so much physical time to get the resources and nutrients out of there. But if I disperse it like a tributary, the Amazon River comes flowing in, and all of a sudden it goes into thousands of small streams, the rate of which the water is moving slows way down. So now it goes through, so it's very easy. So imagine you're trying to catch fish out of the Amazon, and it's just crushing through there. But now you split it into thousands of tributaries, all of a sudden the fish should be way easier to pick out of that. Right? That's what you're doing, right? So having more capillaries allows you to get more stuff in and more stuff out, and it doesn't run through the muscle as fast as it used to. Inside the muscle, more mitochondria, bigger mitochondria, higher functioning mitochondria, and a whole bunch of metabolic adaptations that allow us to do that. And so that's how we've achieved efficiency on that side. So the more we're able to do that, via capillaries or mitochondria or any other host of things, the more efficient I am with that oxygen. The more oxygen I'm getting out of the tissue, the less I have to pump. So now I've further reduced heart rate. And so now I'm feeling very fresh, very low heart rate to do the same exact work equivalent. That's what people are saying when they're saying, I'm efficient. If you had a metabolic cart, you could test that. And you could see, at submax, we're traditionally talking about higher percentage of my energy coming from fat rather than carbohydrates as a fuel. So that would be another indirect marker of efficiency.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as maximum.
Got it. And this, the increase in capillaries, is that what is stimulated by, I think it's referred to as shear stress?
You can.
Yeah?
Yep, shear stress will absolutely do it. This is just like the force of blood coming in and smashing up against things, right? There's a number of things that are going to be involved in any global form of angiogenesis, right? So that could be that. There's chemical signals, there's hormonal signals. You mentioned physical ones coming in. So you have a whole system of ways to turn on and activate and say, hey, we need more capillary in this area. Just the mitochondrial demand itself will do that as well. So they'll submit signals back as well that do that. So physiology is very redundant, right? It's going to give you multiple ways to get something done, and that's one of the many ways.
I mean, incredible. So cool.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned first principles. And obviously resistance training and cardio play I would assume, among your first principles. But essentially, what are Dr. Andy Galpin's first principles when it comes to just overall health and longevity?
Yeah. So the term first principles, I won't go too far into this. I don't think that's really what you're really asking about. But the term first principles is a thought process of saying, I will take a problem and I'll reduce it all the way down to the baseline such that every time I encounter an assumption, I go past it. Not forward, I go backwards. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom to where there's no more assumptions. And then I'm going to go backwards and start going up. And every time I encounter an assumption, we're going to actually make sure that that assumption is correct. And so first principles in this application is things like, it's why I don't care about the nutrition stuff earlier, right? So first principles is like, all right, is this a generally accepted truth? maybe it isn't, right? And this is one of the reasons it's nice to challenge science, right? Like there's lots of times in even our own field, we just accepted something as true and true. And it's like somebody did first principles and was like, really? Oh, it's been around for 30 years. Like it's in all the textbooks. Like where's the paper? And you go back and you're like, oh shit, man, like that wasn't actually that strong of a base, and it just got permeated, right? Happens a lot, more than people would think. So you got the baseline. So for me, that is, okay, is there a teleological truth here? Is there a biological truth here? Is it passing this first wave of, does that make sense as a true ubiquitous finding?
Sniff test.
Sniff test. Sure, right? Like, does it even kind of like pass that? If not, all right, great. Is this something that is true for all humans now and forever? Yes or no? Right? It doesn't always have to pass, but pick your example. Fruit is dangerous. Okay, great. Now, is it possible some people, sure. Is that a universal human truth? How could it be? So I don't need to read any of your blog posts. I don't need to read any of the epidemiology studies. I don't need to read any of that stuff. There is just no chance that is a general human truth. No way, right? Again, you can run some mental gymnastics and try to make an argument, but it wouldn't be cogent. It wouldn't be effective, right? So then you go up, right? Is it general human truth? Yes or no? Great. And then if not, what's the next step of assumption, right? Is this something then that needs to be carried out for a lifetime? Was this an acute or chronic thing? Was this a functionality of measurement? Was this a functionality of outcome? And you just start running all these scenarios until, for me, I can come back to the bottom and say, okay, is it a general human truth that one needs B vitamins? Yeah. Yeah. Is it a general human truth one needs sunlight? Yeah, like pretty much, right? Is it a general human truth that humans need some social connection? Yeah. And like, so it's not actually that hard to walk all the way back and say, yeah, have we done this across our history as a species? Probably. Again, are there individual groups that did? Yeah, sure. But like colloquially, has this been done? Sure. Okay, that doesn't mean anything though. There's a thing called natural fallacy, which is very important. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good or right. It's a very big deal. Like we hear this all the time. Well, it's more natural. Like I don't give a shit at all. There's lots of things that are natural that are not a good thing at all for us. Okay, It's natural to die at 30 from heart disease. Like it's not good. And many other examples, right? So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's there, but it's just the first line, right? Is it generally true? Okay, yeah, great. Now moving forward, then, okay, what are those general truths? And then, but moving forward, then, okay, well then, what subgroup doesn't it apply for? Okay, great, that's interesting. Let's definitely know that, right? So easy examples are genetic predispositions for any number of things, right? Oh, okay, great. So potentially these people that have X, Y, and Z should or shouldn't do more of this. Very interesting. Doesn't make it a general human truth though, right? Like we saw this clearly with the nutrition field is the easiest one to pick on here, right? Because it is, oh, you shouldn't eat, fill in the blank, right? This is the playbook of these things are also so boring, right? It's the same playbook every time, right? I was in a dungeon somewhere and found some secret paper and study that no one else has ever heard, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, sure you did. Great. story, scapegoat. Like that's a whole like, actually like 7-step system is really fun, but you take that system, you put it on everyone, it's all the same. It's all the same system. The guys that are now getting popular, like last couple of weeks, it's the same exact playbook. It's just so ridiculous. So it's not interesting there. So you go back to that fundamental truth and you go forward and say, okay, so then what in my special situation, like where can I kind of run back down this game of Tetris and see like, this is the thing that folds in for me. So you run the stuff that is ubiquitously true as your baseline foundation. And then from there, you get high precision stuff, right? But you have to identify, acknowledge, and recognize that high precision stuff is really just for that person. The more data you have, the more precision you are, the less it applies to anybody else. And both of those things are good, right? You want to know way more about you. There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that we can do that most people aren't aware of to get to next level stuff. Then there's also just fundamental truths that get most of the people most of the way there. And so like it just depends on, again, what game you want to play. But for me, first principles, that's what I'm talking about, right? So if it doesn't meet a ubiquitous truth, I'm probably not starting there. Unless I've got real strong reason to think that, right? So I'm not worried about, like Fibres is an easy example. Like I'm really not worried about that. You could pull up any argument you want from some mechanism study and things. I don't really care. unless I have a situation that I'm going through with an athlete where I really am having some problem we can't resolve, some issue to think that, it's just so unlikely to be the problem relative to things that are staring us in the face. It just doesn't make sense as a starting place.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, from the standpoint of nutrition, I don't feel like I'm as a science nerd and as somebody who wants to know as much as possible about the field that I'm in. Obviously, I value science and I appreciate all the new studies that come out, and I think it's important to view each new study in the context of the broader body of evidence. But also, I don't think we need any more science when it comes to knowing how to appropriately feed ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we know what a biologically appropriate diet is, which isn't to say that there aren't individual nuances, as you've mentioned, but also, like, I don't need any more data to tell me that, lean red meat is a health food.
Yeah.
That dark leafy greens are probably great for me. That fruit is not killing me slowly.
That's why I don't find any interest in those conversations.
Yeah.
I'm just like, it can be so simple, and you put 90% on the 90%, like you're gonna cover your base. So like, I just don't have a ton of interest in those conversations. The nuanced stuff is more of my interest, right? So like, how do we get people in a position that is more effective for them without the scare tactics, without the like, people get doped into personalized nutrition or personalized training or personalized sleep. And it's in large part garbage. Like, it's mostly garbage. It is like, oh, we're gonna give you a hyper precision plan. Like, all right, great. Then why are all of my people getting intermittent fasting and keto? Like, hyper precision. What are you talking about? Like, you just gave everybody everything, and then like, well, it turns out great, they lost a bunch. Like, that's not precision. That is everybody got pulled off grains. Everybody got pulled up. All right, like, I'm out. Like, that's not precision. That is, you just gave me a different calorie allotment. Like that's your version of precision is, you didn't put the foods in there I told you I didn't like. And then you change my calories versus my husband's. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Super helpful. Like,
yeah.
I mean, great, but like, don't oversell what that is. That's not that impressive.
Yeah. A lot of people are afraid of oatmeal these days.
I get it. You're gonna get like likes and stuff or whatever. You're gonna get attention, but like,
well, there's a continuum, I mean, there's like, with regard to oatmeal, which is like, it's so funny that we're even talking about it. Because when you look at all of the high performing, like, I'm sure, if you were to do a survey of all the top bodybuilders, performance athletes, oatmeal is like a staple food for those people, right?
Yeah. So like, I don't want to come off the wrong way here, but when I see things like that, my immediate thought is, oh, you have nothing interesting to say. You don't actually do anything with anybody. You're not really solving anybody's problems. Why? Because like, the best you can come up with is like, social media sensationalized, you're going to get people aggravated on both sides of the equation, get likes and shares. You don't have anything to say. You have no content.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I think when I see that. I'm like, great. Now, if something came out of like, oh, here's this really interesting application of oatmeal that can be done. Here's the way we're doing it. Not for the sake of novelty, but some other stuff there, like really cool. Great. But when throwing things like out there, again, I don't like to give them even attention on platforms like this, because you're like, you don't have that. To me, is just like the biggest sign ever that you have nothing actually interesting to say. So if I brought you a $30 million athlete, in which I work with many, and said, great, and you told them yay or nay on oatmeal, I'm like, that's the best you can do. This person's career is on the line. We have unlimited resources. The best you could come up with was telling them red meat's bad, or like red meat's good, or whatever. Like, that's the best you can do? Yeah. Come on, son. Like, get out of here. You're not gonna be in our room. Like, you're not gonna be in our team if that's what you can come up with. So when I see that, I'm like, all right, you're not doing anything. I could give you 1,000 people who are doing things that don't have social media accounts. Like, that's not what they're posting. Like, that's not the stuff. That's not the conversations we're having with people that are like really trying to see what the human body is capable of. So I'm just like, I'm out. Like,
100%, and that's why I appreciate the content that you create online, and just from my own like standpoint, if you go to I'm never doing, like, you'll never see me do. I don't think, maybe once or twice I've done some kind of like reaction video, but I generally don't do reaction videos. I think those are so lowbrow and intellectually lazy, right? I don't, I mean, I hope I've never like fear-mongered any kind of food, in a way that I couldn't stand behind, and justify. But I don't think I've ever done anything just for clicks in that regard.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like my sights are set way higher. It's like, how can I actually add to the conversation with my background and my skill set and improve public health in a real way?
Yep. I mean, I think that's important for people like Lane to do what he's doing on things like that. And that's great. Like, I love, it is important for people to see both sides of those questions, if that's the stuff you're interested in. So kudos to all those people doing those things. That's great. I know people find it helpful. Somebody comes up and says something, and when you're not in this field, you're like, man, is that real or not? Like, I wish somebody that knew something about the field would tell me if that's like legit or not.
Yeah.
So that's all great. It's just not like what you and I use our platforms for personally. But again, like, I think those are important. I don't want anyone to be like, yo, he's talking trash. But like, Lane's a good friend. Like, I think it's great. Super important. He does all those things. That's awesome. And other folks like that. But
yeah,
like, that's just not the topic I'm interested in. There's so many other things I think we can do with sleep, with nutrition, that are way more impactful in people's lives, that just telling them like a food item is good or bad is
Yeah. Why, speaking of sleep, why is rest and recovery so crucial in the context of exercise physiology?
Man, just pick your metric. You want brain health, neuroplasticity, bone health, longevity, recovery, injury rate, risk, performance, reaction time, speed. Like, you pick a metric you're interested in, and you'll find a mountain of science behind those things. What is also particularly interesting, I think, is more important, is if you see any of the data on sleep extension, sleep banking. Okay, great. So if you don't believe me, here's a couple of things to fire at you. Depending on what country you're in, you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 50 million Americans with a sleep disorder. Something like that, right? Which means you got to have somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I'll throw out different terms here, but you'll have about 20 or 25% of people that have a sleep disorder. About 80 to 90% of those go undiagnosed. So sleep in general is really problematic. If you step up into athletes now, these numbers get higher. They're larger, and they're under different demands. So sleep is extremely problematic. People also, there's so much cool information on this. If you ask people to assess their sleep time, how many hours they slept, they're actually pretty decent. This is where wearables are good. But people are actually honestly pretty good at telling that. Where stuff falls off the cliff is quality. Defining optimal sleep, better sleep. This is extraordinarily challenging. And people significantly underappreciate, and then there's studies after studies on this, about how much things like cognitive function reduces with bad sleep, and people can't perceive it. So actual memory, logic, decision-making, clear-headedness go down significantly with even slightly suboptimal sleep. And what I'm talking about here is, to be clear, I'm not talking about research on sleep deprivation, 48 hours straight, things like that, or even extreme sleep restriction, so 2 hours a night. I'm talking about the difference of 6.5 hours versus 8. There's a real line right around the 6.5, 7, where things just start to separate. For athletes, that number is even higher. And things start to move, but people can't perceive that. So many people think, like, I sleep pretty good. I sleep at 85%. I'm there 90%. And then when you actually give a full proper test on these things, the numbers are all over the board. I could give you a couple of examples. We currently have a UFC world champion. Same thing, high perception of sleep. I sleep great, sleep great, sleep great. Real official testing here, sleep is very, very poor, right? Lots of ways to optimize. So when you do that, and you look at the research, there's a couple of classic studies. Sherry Ma's lab out of Stanford, 2008, 2011, did a couple of studies that were really interesting. And they took the Division I players. These were the swimmers first, and then the basketball team second. So Stanford, high-level athletes, already pretty peaked out, right? And they asked them to sleep an additional 2 hours a night. And so what you're seeing here is a 2 to 4 week kind of baseline strategy. No extreme, like, intentional sleep restrictions. So it took them down to 3 hours a night or anything like that. Just like a normal thing. I think they're probably, I'll have to look at the paper, but I think it's something like they're sleeping 6.5 hours, like plus or minus. There's variation, right?
Yeah.
Going in, but it's there. And then ask them to sleep 10 hours. I think the exact thing was, we want you to sleep 10 hours a night. And they did that for 5 to 7 weeks. Both studies were similar enough structure here. There are little differences, but it's close enough. Okay, great. Net result was, I think group average was 110-minute increase in sleep over the time. In both studies, without the exact data in front of me, you're looking at improvements in reaction time. I think the basketball team reduced their sprint time by half a second.
Wow.
Free throw shooting, 3-point shooting, Overall accuracy improved by like 9 to 9.2 or 3%. So a 9% increase in shooting skill of a Division I basketball player in a month by extending sleep.
Wow.
Now, it's one study. There's limitations. There's no control group. You can't blind people. Like there are tons of limitations here. But if you start popping into sleep extension, you're going to see this study repeated in a lot of forms and fashion.
Well, how do you do it? It's not like I can just will myself to sleep an extra 3 hours.
Oh, my friend, there are a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah?
So the common reaction is that, like, great, there's no way I could sleep more. Well, how do you think they got them to sleep more? You remember in college, if someone said, could you sleep 2 more hours? You probably would have been like, well, I could sleep more, but 2 more hours. Like, that's hard. It's way easier than people think. A couple of ways. Number one, nap. So you throw in a nap throughout the day and you can gain yourself 30 to 90 minutes, right? Pretty easy to get college kids to naps. But the research, again, I'm going to kind of summarize the state-of-the sleep extension research, sleep banking, is going to collectively say you're not talking about people who are sleeping 8.5 hours and then adding 2 hours to their sleep. What's generally happening is these people are slightly underslept. So an average is going to be, and again, look at the research on athletes, they tend to sleep less than the general population, while their demand for sleep is even higher. So the sleep, you poke around with sleep scientists. I know Alison Brager, Jeffrey Durmer, Stephen Locke, Ian Dunnican, all these people, I know all of them personally, and they're all going to say, 9 hours is the number. Like you need to be at 9 hours. So these people are at 6.5. Again, there's deviation here. Some are lower, some are higher. Asking somebody who's a little bit underslept to sleep an extra hour is incredibly possible. You throw in a nap on there and you start like getting some changes there. So it's not, you don't want to think of it as I sleep great, I sleep 8.5 hours routinely, now I'm going to add 2 hours. That's not it. It's really people who are not sleeping as well as they think they are. Maybe you're sleeping 8, but it's at very low quality, a lot of waking events, respiratory rates way too high, something like that. And now we can add this stuff on, so it's not effective sleep. Or it's people who are just under the level. You bring them back up with the sleep extension stuff, and we just start seeing things pop off. It is a growing field. We need more research, 100%. It is not a certainty at all. I don't want to oversell this stuff, but it's pretty exciting.
I love it.
Yeah.
My big issue is that I wake up to pee, which I guess is normal, but sometimes I wake up to pee twice in one night. I feel like there's definitely
How old are you?
I'm 41.
That is not even close to normal.
It's not close to normal?
No, that's totally solvable too.
Interesting.
So
okay,
a couple
how do we
things.
solve it?
I can live with one. Depending on what your sleep really looks like, and you're not going to be able to get this information from a standard commercial tracker. We actually run full clinical sleep studies on people in their house. That's what we do. We actually build a whole sleep lab in people's houses. It's not nearly as expensive. This is full environmental scanner, so it's full-time, real-time scanning of environment. For CO2, CO2 will smash people's sleep.
Interesting.
Oh, it'll tank it.
If there's
Almost
too much
fast.
CO2 in the room?
Correct. And it is commonly the case.
Wow.
Yeah. So the quick version of this is, remember earlier when I said when you take a breath in, you breathe in oxygen.
Yeah.
You take a breath out, you breathe out CO2, right? There is a very direct relationship between CO2 concentrations in your body as a bidirectional relationship between psychology and physiology. CO2 is a primary mechanism in which that's what makes you want to breathe, right? It's one of the things. It also kicks off an entire cascade of stress. So it moves you sympathetic, right? So you remember parasympathetic is kind of rest and digest, and sympathetic is fight or flight, kind of upregulated. So if you increase CO2 concentrations in your blood, this kicks off sympathetic. If you decrease it, it goes the opposite direction, right? So when you're exercising, for example, CO2 concentrations are building up. To back up maybe one quick step, the final end result of all metabolic processes is 3 things: ATP, water, and CO2. So it doesn't matter if we're talking carbohydrates or fat, and it doesn't matter what you're using this energy for. Exercise, digestion, brain power, recovering damage, doesn't matter. So anytime metabolic processes go up, for any reason, CO2 concentrations in tissue go up. That means CO2 concentrations in the blood go up, and it's linear, right? More energy, more CO2. So your body senses that. As that rate increases, that directly tells you to increase respiration rate. That's the mechanism. So oxygen is really there to regulate metabolism, but CO2 is primarily there to regulate pH. If you have changes in CO2, this is going to alter pH. And so your body's hypersensitive to that. So when that starts to rise a little bit, it says ventilate. If it goes too low, CO2, then you slow down respiration. Okay? So if I hyperventilate, I've dumped a bunch of CO2. My concentration of CO2 gets too low. Okay? This is called hyperventilation. This is going to cause respiratory alkalosis. Okay, so I've gone alkalytic there. If I hold my breath and let CO2 build up, this gives me extreme air hunger, desire to breathe, and acidity is going up, right? So pH is going down. So very tight regulation of the mechanism here. If I were to ask you to hold your breath right now, and you did it for, I typically will do this, in fact, in talks and class and stuff, and I just have you hold it for a minute. You'll start to feel that air hunger. You'll start to feel that desire to respirate. And then I said, go to sleep right now. Like, there's no chance, right?
Right.
I'm exaggerating the point, but that's happening on a very small scale. So if you are doing one of a couple of things, if you're over breathing at night and over ventilating and hyperventilating, you're altering pH. Okay. So respiratory rate is a really clear indicator of dysfunction. If it gets too high, I know something's going on, right? You're causing yourself to be in a situation of slight alertedness. You're kicking it up too much, right? Where the environment plays a role, and this is a very clear number. The research right now is growing, but 900 parts per million in the room is a very standard cutoff. You start getting above that number, which is not uncommon. We actually have, when we're done, I have a sensor with me right now, actually.
Oh my God, amazing.
Totally do that.
Yeah.
Pretty common. Like the room we're sitting in is fairly small.
Those are commonly available, those CO2 sensors? Oh, no.
I have.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Of course you do.
But it would be common for this number to be, I don't know, it's probably maybe 1,100, 1,200. That's not a huge
So what's the solution? Like more plants in the bedroom, or?
Plants are going to have a marginal effect of that. It would be not uncommon for like a typical building maybe to be 2,400, 3,000.
Like a highly insulated building.
Yeah, depending, right?
Yeah.
The studies that have done that. Again, like I don't want to overfear you here. So if you're at 1,100, like probably fine. It would be normal. My house routinely gets to 2,500. If we have 4 family members, 2 dogs, and all doors and things are shut all day, that number gets higher. So what's your solution? Plants? Yeah, I'm never going to argue against that. There are actually certain special algae that we can get that we can set next to people's beds.
Allegedly, plants in the bedroom are not a good thing from a feng shui standpoint, but I'm sticking with the science on this one.
Okay, well, the other issue is actually they can be detrimental if they're releasing pollens that are upsetting and allergenic to you.
Huh.
So if they're causing your nose to like plug up or they're like, you don't want to do that. So plants are good. The algae's better because you don't have to worry about the pollen issue. These are a couple of things. This is one of the many reasons why we say things like don't have your dogs in your bedroom, right? Don't have your animals in there. Don't have extra bodies in a bedroom. Open up doors. Make sure your ventilation is high. If you can, open up your windows. Now you have a trade-off there of light and noise. So depending on the situation, that may or may not be a solution. But starting there is a really good idea because if not, the concentration of CO2 gets too high. You breathe that increases your own endogenous CO2, which then signals you to you're breathing more. I can see that. And now you're slightly in sympathetic. So these people sometimes have an issue falling asleep, but this is a very common thing for folks who wake up often and have a hard time kind of like getting back to sleep. So to circle back to your pee question, I'm going to tie this together here. If you were drinking a ton of water a couple of hours before bed, this could be as simple as stopping that. And we have done this many, my company, Absolute Rest, has dealt with this so many times where people are just like smashing water for the sake of like wanting to be hydrated. And it's like they want to do this giant, robust environmental analysis and run like full clinical grade FDA approved sleep studies in their house. And I'm like, yo, just stop drinking so much water. You could save a bunch of money and just like you're drinking way too much water. That is an easy solution. In your case, that may or may not, I don't know what you're doing hydration wise, but if at your age, twice a night is probably just water. You're probably drinking too much water.
Yeah.
If not, though, what's typically happening is at night, you're supposed to be sending signals to your kidneys that say, stop filtering and producing urine so you don't wake up and pee. If you're sleeping poorly, though, that signal kind of continues to creep in. And so what's often happening more than people realize, again, it can be both. It can be you just have way too much water. But many, many times, people think they're waking up to pee. The reality is you're already waking up because of your bad sleep, and then you realize you kind of have to pee, and then you go pee.
Interesting.
That is way more common than people realize. When you say 2 or more, like that's when I start perking up. Of like if you're peeing in it, you're peeing a gallon of pure ice clear like water, then I'd be like, all right, you're drinking way too much water.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, this is like, bordering on TMI, but like there's pee. It's not like an urge to pee followed by no pee. Like I pee,
Yeah.
So it probably is like,
you're going to pee.
Yeah.
But it could be just too much water at night, but it could be that. So we've very routinely gotten people to the zero. Like waking up a night, the number of 0 is the goal.
Yeah.
You get past 60, 65 years old, like 1 is acceptable. 2, I don't like to see 2. And somebody your age, like for sure 2 is you're leaving a lot on the table with 2.
Damn.
No question. Not something that would be picked up necessarily in a tracker. It'd pick up the waking events, but it's not going to tell you why it's happening.
Huh. Now, I know that when you there's this trend of mouth taping, which I've occasionally taped my mouth. Sure. And I know that nasal breathing increases nitric oxide production, right? Is there any relationship there between CO2 in the blood?
Definitely. Yeah. This is all the same thing, right? This is one of the reasons why that works. So typically, when you go through the mouth, right, and you inhale, this is going to be generally more sympathetic. Going through the nose is generally more parasympathetic, right? You have the addition of nitric oxide from the nose. That's great. Mouth taping is fine. We do use it occasionally. That said, if you're going to do it, you want to know whether or not it's actually making a difference. And so proper analytics there are really, really key. So making sure it's doing something. There's very little harm to doing it. You can actually kind of triage this a little bit. So if you ask questions about how dry is your mouth in the morning, and you stack that against what they did urine-wise, you start to have a really clear picture, right? So if you woke up 3 times to pee, right, and then your mouth was super dry, it's like, all right, we clearly know hydration status was high, but yet your mouth is dry. You got potential signs of mouth breathing. If the opposite is the case, right, so no, I didn't wake up to pee at all. Okay, great. Mouth is dry, and then I peed in the morning and it was a little bit in yellow. May or may not be mouth breathing, like you're just dehydrated, right? It's the environment or something like that. So you can actually kind of figure these things out. I'm not against it. It's a low risk, low cost sort of strategy. When we typically do it, though, again, we're going to look to see whether or not it's making a fundamental difference in one of a number of metrics. And if not, then we'd like to say, hey, not a big deal. But I'm not going to try to convince anybody to not do it. It's potential high reward for very low investment here. So, good strategy. But that's going to be playing the same CO2 game, right? So regulation of when you breathe through your nose, you're going to generally slow down respiration rate. And so blocking people from overbreathing is probably the biggest benefit of not mouth breathing at night. And so you're slowing that respiration down. So you're not dumping as much CO2 unnecessarily, which is going to regulate pH, which is going to regulate everything back there. So that's, in my opinion, like that's probably the more interesting part than it is like the nitric oxide side. But chemistry is chemistry, right? Like everything's playing together. So it's all going to work.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Dude, I've learned so much. This was so fun. What's next for you? I know you've got this, like, you just dropped like a course, right? Or some kind of training program? So we've got a number of things. We have, depending on when you're listening to this, we just launched, my partner, Dan Garner, and I, a thing called Biomolecular Athlete. And that's our education company. And so I've never done this before. This is the first ever course I have out. So this is an introduction. This is what we're calling it a toolkit course. So this is training and nutrition. And we're going to skip a lot of the background in physiology and a lot of the philosophy and go straight to what are the tools that we actually use to write training programs and nutrition programs. And then the course comes with the actual tools, the Excel files, the templates, like all that stuff. There's links and everything to the physiology if you want, but really, like, my YouTube is all free and full of all that stuff anyways, and always will be. And so this is like, all right, if you want to like get into writing your own programs and stuff, that's that first toolkit. I can't promise you when or if we'll do another course, but that one is out there. Dope,
available.
dude.
So yeah.
Well, I hope it's super successful.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. I feel like we could just keep going, but let's leave room for a round 2. This was fascinating and a pleasure getting to connect with you in person.
Likewise.
I've got one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people find you on social media and support your work?
Yeah, the Instagram and Twitter are the easiest places. Like you, I pretty much use it exclusively for science communication. I don't even really put personal stuff in there. So if you want to hear about our papers and other research I find interesting, those are the best places for that. It's got all my other links to stuff. So the Biomolecular Athlete course is probably live by the time you're watching this. I mentioned quickly Absolute Rest, our sleep company. And so we can do a lot of fun and interesting things there. And then we actually have in January launching something that the world doesn't know anything about.
Exciting.
And I'm happy to share right now.
Yeah, Genius Life exclusive. Let's
it is
go.
Pretty much. Actually, that's right. We'll go. So we actually have a company called Vitality that's going to be out in the new year. And this is a fully automated high-performance blood software.
Whoa, dope.
So this is, if you're interested in getting your blood analyzed, this is, again, not longevity. We don't do disease. There's ApoE not on the panel. And that's not what we do. But if you want to have your blood analyzed from the perspective of high performance, what do we look at? What markers do we take? And then specifically, our reference ranges are built on high-performance athletes. So we're not using standard Mayo Clinic or LabCorp reference ranges for optimal. So this is really based on thousands of professional athletes. And then in addition to that, that comes with a micronutrient-based nutrition protocol based upon that blood work and a hyper-specific supplementation protocol, all based on that. So it's not just like general recommendations. It is a complete, very long program with those things and other stuff. So that is going to be coming out in January. So already out potentially.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it. Well, the last question that gets asked to everybody on the show, what does living a genius life mean to you?
I guess spending more time with people like you.
Oh, dude, that means a lot coming from you.
Yeah, man.
Because you hang out with some pretty brilliant dudes.
Same though, man. Like, it's interesting. Our circles are very overlapped. It's a big Venn diagram between our friends. So it's funny it took us so long. It's not funny. It's your schedule, my schedule.
And we live in the same state too.
We're like cool. Not even that many miles away.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's notoriously difficult to get me out of my house, so don't feel bad about that. No, I think to really answer your question, like to me, it's doing something with vigor and passion, right? So whatever that is to you, it's going to make life better. Anyways, you and I know what ways we like, and the world knows what type of stuff we're interested in. But whatever you're interested in, it doesn't matter. You do that with vigor and passion. Everything in physiology gets better. We didn't even have time to get into our recent paper on the brain health and strength and all these things. We have some more stuff coming actually, which I didn't have a chance to share about. We have I think it's going to be a very impactful paper coming, able to identify muscle quality via biomarkers, which is going to be very standard in any blood marker test, any hospital.
Wow, muscle quality via blood biomarkers.
Yeah.
Whoa. Cool.
We've already done this. We've already got it validated against the UK Biobank, against NHANES database, and we're doing the last couple of pieces on the paper and thing right now. But things like that are, when you look across the stuff that makes people generally healthy, it's the same basic first principles. So as long as you get into something and you do it with passion, almost all these metrics move, right? So we can pick them out in blood, we can pick them out in brain health, we can pick them out in any other, and it just seems to be really ubiquitous across things. So Genius Life to me means that, something you're really fun about and doing it hard.
Hell yeah. Love that, brother.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.